I'll hand over to Mike Eisen, who'll be able to give you a bit more of a rundown of what's happening with eLife's new review model. Mike.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for taking the time out to come join us today. I'm going to try to be brief, although I'm usually bad at that. So I'm just going to jump in. So presuming all of you who are joining here are familiar with eLife and what we're about, but I thought I'd just put some of our new moves in context by reminding you that eLife was founded just a little bit over a decade ago with the mandate from a collection of major research funders to improve the way scientific publishing works and to thereby accelerate science communication and, more importantly, science. The journal was launched in 2012, and it had a bunch of primary, features. It was an open access journal from the start, and it initiated this new model for peer review, where instead of just peer reviewers sending their comments to an editor, they get the peer reviews get discussed and a decision is made collaboratively. Starting in 2016, eLife began what has been a strong commitment to transparency in the peer review process by publishing the decision letters for every accepted paper. After I joined as editor-in-chief in 2019, starting in 2020, we moved to recognize the shift in the community to publishing works, to author-directed publishing of works as preprints by exclusively reviewing articles that have been posted by preprints. This is something we've been doing for the last 2 years. And posting the reviews of every paper we assess publicly. Up to this point, these are posted on bioRxiv alongside the preprint. So the big change that we're initiating now is that we're continuing to review only preprints. We're continuing to publish our peer reviews, and our big shift now is that we are no longer going to be making except reject decisions about the papers that are submitted to us. We're going to continue to peer review them, continue to have our editors and reviewers consult on the outputs of peer review, continue to communicate to the authors ways in which the reviewers and editors think the works can be published. But instead of saying this is or isn't an eLife paper, we instead will be sharing our editors and reviewers' assessment of the work in a compact text form, which I'll show you more about in a second. Okay, so how is this going to work in a practical sense? So the basic kinetics of the process are roughly the same. You submit a paper to us. After the editors look at these papers, we decide on some fraction of them that will be sent out for peer review. They will get peer reviewed in the same way that they currently do, where a reviewing editor identifies the ideal experts to assess the work. They send the paper out for peer review. The peer reviewers continue to do what they're doing now, which is to divide their review into a public section that will be posted alongside the preprint, and a private correspondence to the authors that addresses ways in which the manuscript can be improved or the science can be improved. We will now, instead of taking those peer reviews and posting them to bioRxiv, we will now produce a version of the paper that contains both the author's manuscript and our peer reviews and assessment in a single nice looking paper-like form, which we're calling a reviewed preprint, which is which is the main output of our system in this new model. It'll be a publication that that will shareable, will have a citation and a DOI and look very much like a normal traditional publication. But instead of having a decision as to whether eLife accepted or rejected that paper, it will contain an assessment that I'll show you about in a second. Authors will then have the option to submit a revision in response to the comments of the editors and reviewers, and in most cases can expect that the assessment that we rendered on the initial version of the paper will be updated after the revision. And then at any point after we publish this reviewed preprint, the authors can say, okay, this is fine, this process is done, and declare the current version a version of record, which will be sent to PubMed and other indexing services and will be typeset and turned into a final version of the manuscript. So I'm going to go through each of these steps in detail now, and then we'll take your questions about it. So the submission process is largely unchanged. We will continue to encourage the submission of papers that are already posted as preprints. If papers haven't yet been posted as preprints, we will do so on behalf of the authors. Editors will not send everything out for peer review. Our primary output in this new model is high quality peer reviews that will be valuable to the community, and so we will be asking our editors they will no longer be judging, is this a potentially an eLife paper, because that whole concept is being retired, but instead we will be asking them if they are confident that they and our reviewers can produce high quality reviews that will be of significant value to the community. Papers that are sent out for peer review, obviously the main difference will be the peer review process will no longer be directed at deciding whether or not this paper belongs in eLife. So that's completely gone from the system. Instead, the reviewers will submit a public review of the paper that's meant to be read by anybody interested in the work. They're written in a constructive way that's meant to be respectful of the authors and their work, and fully intended for public posting and consumption, as well as they will continue to communicate privately their suggestions for the manuscript to the author. At the end of the peer review process, after all the reviews are in, the editor and reviewers will get together and they will discuss the work just like they currently do. They'll hash through issues that are raised in individual peer reviews, and importantly, where they used to make a decision about whether or not the paper would go into eLife, they will now construct a short, compact assessment of the work that uses a shared vocabulary across editors to briefly state what the editors and reviewers think the significance of the research is and how strong the evidence presented by the authors in support of their conclusions is. And again, I'll show you an example of this in a second. After they write that assessment, they'll send a decision letter containing the assessment and the individual peer reviews to the authors. The authors will both be able to correct any factual errors in the public reviews, as well as to respond to the public reviews. And once that's done, we will post the collection of the paper and the public reviews and the assessment as a reviewed preprint. So all reviewed preprints, every paper that we review, once the peer reviews and assessment are in, will be made available on eLife's website as a reviewed preprint. And this is a kind of new type of intermediate document in the publishing process. It will include the paper, the assessment, the public reviews, and the author's response. And it will get a permanent link, a permanent DOI, as well as a citation from eLife that people can use in any place in which they rely on being able to point to a version of their work. This is what it's going to look like. This is a paper that's gone through this process and is now on the eLife website as a reviewed preprint. It's a paper. You'll be very familiar with the layout and format. It looks like an eLife paper. The components, everything that you're used to having in an eLife paper, the abstract and the document and the figures and the supplements are all there. The main difference is that we will be now adding this eLife assessment immediately underneath the abstract. So whereas you might previously have looked at eLife papers to see whether or not we accepted it, this is what you're going to look at now. It's the rendered judgment of the editors and reviewers about the scientific impact and support for the data in the manuscript as it currently exists, not as they think it might be or not as the editors or reviewers want it to be, but it's an assessment of the work as the authors have currently published it. So that is going to be the main difference. It'll say very clearly that this is a preprint that was reviewed by eLife. The entire history of the document will be displayed. You'll be able to link to bioRxiv or wherever the article appeared. The full peer reviews for the manuscript, they're not. We don't want people to have to wade through the entire peer reviews just to get to the paper, but they're readily. Oops, they're readily available on the. Sorry, my mouse went crazy. They're readily available on the site. So this is a complete. This complete package is our primary publishing output, right? It's the author's work and our peer reviews. So authors can, and we expect that most will want to submit a revised version of their manuscript for re-review. Unless the changes are trivial, that paper will be sent out for re-review, and the editors and reviewers will update their reviews and assessment of the work as appropriate, given the changes to the manuscript. Now, importantly, we are not compelling authors to go through this process. We're not going to compel them to make any changes. It's entirely up to them what they feel needs to be addressed in their revisions. Obviously, if the editors and reviewers identified a weakness in the manuscript or some place where the data were not supporting the conclusions, and the authors are not able to convince them otherwise, the assessment of the review, the resubmitted preprint will continue to convey this. But we hope that in most cases the authors will address the concerns that came up during peer review, and that the final assessment of their work will reflect the fact that this is a paper with whatever impact the editors and reviewers judge, and data that supports the author's conclusions. As I mentioned before, obviously, even though these reviewed preprints are what we think of as the primary output of our process, there are a bunch of places in the ecosystem of science today where you need to say this work is finished, that this is not going to be updated again, and the authors are kind of done with this particular version of communicating their science. And most noticeably, this matters for places like PubMed that will only take a final version of record of a manuscript. So in the new eLife model, the authors can declare their work a version of record at any point after we've posted a reviewed preprint, and that version of the paper, along with our assessment, will be conveyed to the appropriate indexing services. We'll also, at that point, typeset it and do a few other things to make it into a kind of finalized version of record. And importantly, when the authors declare that it's a version of record, they're essentially saying that they're done updating it, and that this sort of terminates the peer review, updating, and assessment process. The DOI and the links that you create to the original reviewed preprint will remain the same through the version of record, so that importantly, when you publish a paper with us, when you send us a work and we review it, you will get a link that you can include in job applications and grant applications and so forth that will remain permanent and will link through to the most recent version of the work as it gets updated during its lifespan. So unlike with a preprint where you have different citations to bioarchive that you then have to update when it gets published in a journal, these will just remain as a single link through time. Obviously, we still have to defray our costs here, but because the model is changing, and we're basically every paper that we peer review, we are publishing, unlike in the old model where a substantial fraction of our work went to papers that we weren't publishing. We're changing our business model a bit to reflect that. So we are taking our previous publication fee of $3,000, which we applied only to papers that were published in eLife, and reducing that to $2,000, charged effectively at the point at which we commit to peer reviewing the work. And as always, full, no questions asked fee waivers are available to any authors who can't pay that fee. So our goal here is to help support what we're doing, but we never want the inability of authors to pay to be an obstacle to their participating in the system. And so we will continue to allow people to publish in our model, irrespective of whether or not they have the funds to do so. But when they do have the funds, we think $2,000 is a reasonable ask to help support this. Okay, so that's how it's going to work. Why do we think this is a good thing? So, what are the benefits to the authors? Obviously, I think many of you are authors, or we hope potential authors for eLife. I think that the key feature is, right. A lot of us are posting preprints of our work. Preprints are becoming a key way in which science is communicated. But the thing that's missing from preprints is that they are not peer reviewed, and that people who are interested in the work but have questions about its whether or not the authors have really succeeded in doing what they set out to do and what they claimed, and who are not in a position to assess it themselves, don't really have anything to look to in this work, except occasionally a complicated Twitter thread or something. So a major advantage to authors is that their work transitions from an unrefereed preprint into a reviewed preprint relatively quickly. We hope we can get this done in a fairly expedient fashion, so that once you've got work that you're ready to share as a preprint, you can quickly get to a point where that work has been peer reviewed, and the confidence that different audiences of your work will have in its in the science it have will improve as the work as peer reviews are added to it, and it's quicker, much less encumbered process to go from having a preprint to having a work that's gone through peer review than the current publishing system. And so a major thing for us in designing this and thinking about this, and I hope in people finding it appealing, is that this restores a lot of control of publishing to authors. It says, look, you publish your work when you feel it's ready to share, and then we'll peer review it on your timeline, right? If you want to post a preprint and solicit comments from the community before it goes out to a journal, that's great. You tell us when you're ready to have your work preprinted, we peer reviewed. We will peer review it. We'll peer review it quickly, and then we will let you decide what happens next. If you're fine with those peer reviews and that's all you feel has to happen, great. That's all that you have to do. If you want to update your work and have us re-review it and change our assessment of it, that's great too. We're not telling you how to navigate the publishing process. We're giving authors back control that they really never should have lost in the first place. Another important feature is it focuses attention of the process on what the authors have actually published. So our peer reviews, our public peer reviews, are of the work as it stands, not as the reviewers wish that sorry, I had a typo in that. It's not what the reviewers wish the work might have been. It's what the work actually is. This is a much more streamlined process of peer review and publication. It also gives authors clarity and certainty about what's going to happen to their work. And I think, from a reader's perspective, rather than just saying, okay, from an author's perspective, rather than just saying, here's a preprint, included in your paper, it gives to anybody who's interested in your work, as certainly anybody who's assessing you as a candidate for a job or funding or other things, more nuanced and yet still easily digestible output in terms of this eLife assessment. So it satisfies a lot of the basically all of the things that journal titles do in the current ecosystem, but it does it in a quicker, more author friendly, and I think more effective and clear way than the current system does. There are also obviously broad benefits to the scientific community. I think the biggest one for us is it really starts to move us away from a world in which scientists and science is judged based on where it was published, into a world in which it's judged based on what has actually been done and what was published. That in turn fights against this terrible move towards judging science based on impact factors of journals and other quantitative metricization of people's outputs that I think all of us abhor. We hope encourages people to produce science that actually has a durable impact, because the work will continue to be judged and assessed based on what's actually been accomplished, rather than just jockeying to get it into the right journal and assuming that that's all that matters. And honestly, one of our big pushes has been to have the whole process of scientific publishing be directed at serving science rather than at serving the interests of making money. And I think this is a step in the right direction. We have been working with our funders who are obviously big supporters of what we're doing and supporters of changes in scientific publishing. But also we've started to reach out to and get support from a lot of other funders and organizations that are interested in interested in science. I think everybody is broadly supportive of the idea of what we're trying to do and think that change in scientific publishing is long overdue and necessary. And we expect that as the system gets off the ground and people see what we're actually doing, that support for this from other organizations, funders, institutions, and others will continue to accelerate. With that, I am happy to move to answering your questions.
Um, Thank you, Mike, for the talk there. We'll begin answering questions for everyone. We do have quite a few of you on the call on the webinar today. There's over 150 of you. So we may not be able to get to everyone, but we hope we can answer as many questions as possible. So to start today, we had some pre-submitted questions from people who registered. And of those questions, one of them was that since reviews have been published alongside eLife articles for a long time, and we've been posting reviews to preprints servers for a while, how do we expect that this new model is going to take us further and sort of achieve what we've not already done?
Who do you want to start? I'll let you tell us who to talk.
Go ahead, Mike.
So I think the biggest thing we've learned from the current system is that as long as you have a publishing decision attached to a paper, that's what people are going to care about. And as long as we were saying, here are the reviews, here's our assessment, all this stuff is there, as long as we were continuing to say, okay, there are some papers that are eLife papers and some papers that are not, because of the way the rest of the science ecosystem works and because that is what people have been trained to focus on, that is what people focus on. So the reason we're making this change now is that we want people to get away from that idea that what matters is did we accept or reject this paper, and to focus instead on the content we've already been producing. As you point out, we have been publishing peer reviews and a form of these assessments all along for the last couple of years. So the simple and main reason is, we believe, and I think evidence supports the idea, that as long as we're continuing to render decisions on papers, it's impossible to get people to pay attention to anything else we say about it. And so, what we're doing now is basically saying, we're not telling you, we're not making a binary decision. If you're looking at an eLife paper, you have to look at the assessment we made of it. Otherwise, you're not learning anything about what we said. So it's in some ways a very simple change, right? Which it's people think of it as radical because nobody's done it before, but it's a relatively small change in the grand scheme of things. And as I've said this before, but it's radical. It's radical only because the publishing industry is so conservative and so unchanging. In any rational universe, this would be viewed as an obvious and necessary step towards making the output of peer review more instructive to the community.
Awesome, thank you. So we've had another. Sorry, my computer is going wild at the moment. We had a question in the chat which referred to sort of an individual paper, but I just wanted to sort of share like the comment, mostly in that it was related to reviews and what happens to manuscripts where the reviews aren't glowing or are incorrect or inappropriate. Like, what would be the process for sort of handling those kind of papers or those kind of public reviews? So
Jim,
yeah.
So hi. So the first thing to say is we try to very hard not to publish anything inappropriate. You're not seeing the raw, unfiltered peer reviews that are going to go online. That wasn't true, by the way, in the old eLife model, but it is true now. And so the editors will try to read closely through the peer reviews. That'll be the handling editors and the senior editors, and often me as well, the deputy editors, not always, but often. So it will have been through a lot of eyes, and we're looking for inappropriate comments, personal comments. So we hope that that's rare, but it will still happen, I'm sure. And when it does, you will be able to appeal the reviews going online. You can appeal effectively for two reasons. You can appeal because the reviews are factually incorrect. We're not in the business of publishing things that we know are factually incorrect, and so obviously we'll have to agree with you, but if you can prove that they're factually incorrect, then we'll remove those, and we'll also remove things that are personal and inappropriate, if we agree that they're personal and inappropriate.
And importantly, that will happen before the reviews are posted. So the authors get the reviews prior to them going public, and they have an opportunity to contest either the tone or the factual content of the reviews prior to them going published. So, as Tim said, we do I think a pretty good job of making sure that inappropriate comments are filtered out prior to them leaving the hands of the editors. But in the cases where either we failed to do that well or we missed something about the content, that the authors will have a full opportunity to flag that before things go public. We really don't want inappropriate or inaccurate statements to go public. We are not in the business of passing those on. So I hope that our process succeeds in doing that, and it's something we're paying very, very careful attention to.
Great, thank you. I hope that answers your questions. So one more question from the chat, and then we'll go to some of the people that had their hands up. We've had a few people write in asking about sort of, is this new process effectively just giving more power to the editors and that initial decision about whether or not to send something for peer review or not? And how are we sort of considering that side of the new model? I don't know if anyone...
Yeah, I mean, I can.
Either Mike or I could take that.
Yeah, so I think the answer is, look, in an ideal world, everything would get peer reviewed and should get peer reviewed in some way. But we're just one organization that is, we don't have an infinite capacity to review everything. And I think more importantly, we're trying to instantiate a new system in which we want people to pay attention to peer reviews and to the output of the peer reviews. And therefore, it's important that we focus our time and attention on places where we think the peer reviews can be, first of all, where we can do a good job of creating, informative, instructive peer reviews, and where they will be useful to the community. And that's not true for every paper for a variety of reasons we can discuss. Now, you're right that means that editors have are making a decision about what papers go out for peer review. However, it's important to note we are assigning absolutely no value to that judgment in terms of the value of the paper. And I think that once people see when we post a reviewed preprint, there will be reviewed preprints of papers that we judge to be landmark papers that are going to fundamentally change the way that science is conducted in the field, but also papers that we post where we say, look, we thought there was something here, it seemed interesting, but they really didn't deliver on the science. And I think that this idea, which I understand why everybody thinks that the fact that it's an eLife paper is what matters, and authors are controlling, and the editors are controlling what becomes an eLife paper, that it's natural to be concerned that that's how people are going to interpret it. But I think that once they see that is not what we're doing, and that the real purpose here, what the judgment they're making is that peer reviews will be attached to that paper, not that we're saying anything important about the paper. And I think that once that gets off the ground, I think people will stop seeing the editorial selection process as an endorsement, but rather just simply as a statement that we're in a position to do a good job of reviewing this paper.
So, I mean, maybe I can just simplify a little bit what Mike said. I think there's two things that we're doing here simultaneously, and only one of them is reflected in the comments that the editors have more power. So firstly, yes, we're giving editors more power to say what will be an eLife paper, 100% power effectively. And then simultaneously, we're totally devaluing what it means to be an eLife paper to zero. We would like it to be zero. And so that power that we give to editors is then collapsed to zero because there'll be plenty of eLife papers where it isn't a valuable thing to be an eLife paper because their reviews will say it's rubbish. And there are other eLife papers where we say it's wonderful. And so the power that we give to the editors, which is a new power, is simultaneously being devalued.
Thanks. So I hope that sort of helps answer that question. So going now to some of the people who've raised their hands, I think Francisco has been waiting a while, so I should allow you to talk. There we are. Francisco, if you'd like to.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
So I guess follow up on the previous questions. I guess I'm not clear on the selection process for actually deciding which papers get sent out for peer review. I understand the factors you just mentioned, but I guess like through some actual practice, how does that work? Like, what are the actual criteria for deciding whether a paper gets sent for peer review?
So, I mean, I think that effectively we are going to be reviewing a similar number of papers that we review right now. And instead of saying, would eLife benefit from publishing this paper, we're saying, we'd like to say, will the community benefit from there being public reviews of these papers? That's the difference in access. There'll be some correlation between those two things, no question. But there'll also be many cases where those things differ. Like if there's some dodgy COVID paper that needs a strong authority to be clear about the fact that it's dodgy, then we'll peer review that, for example, because the peer reviews have value even though the paper doesn't, right? And so that's the difference, right? But we're still making a threshold on whether we think the peer reviews are going to have value. There are examples, I think, pretty clear examples where we think that we won't peer review for similar reasons to we don't peer review now. So one is if we just think it's going to get trashed, we're not in the business of publicly shaming scientists. If we know we're going to trash something, we won't peer review it. I think that's like fair enough, right? Unless it's in the public interest that we trash it. The second, there's an interesting decision about how we should do this on the level of interest or the level of the readership, because the point is we're making public reviews. There are many very, very high quality papers within a field which effectively are useful to the protagonists of that field, to the people who are perfectly able themselves to evaluate the paper, but are not of interest to people who are not able to evaluate the paper. There's little point in public review of those kinds of papers, right? Because anybody that is going to read it knows how to evaluate it themselves. So you can see the kinds of things that will input into that decision. I mean, effectively, we're not in a position to peer review everything that gets submitted to us, and so we have to make decisions. But those decisions are no longer about protecting the journal's name; they're about maximizing the value of the peer reviews that we produce.
And I think, this is one of the reasons why it's so important that we get this model to be adopted in the long run by other publishers, so that we obviously don't want to be the sole arbiters of whether or not a work preprints get public peer reviews. And we're practical constraints sort of put us into that position, but in the long run, we'd like every preprint to be able to be publicly reviewed in a systematic and fair and robust way. And so we're working more broadly to make sure the kind of community of people who are engaging in this kind of process is constantly growing. So.
Emma, can we take a question about submitting elsewhere? There's been 2 or 3 questions like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, there's been a lot of activity in the chat. Is there one in particular that you have seen that you would?
I mean, there are several of them. One says, can the authors retract and then submit elsewhere. Another says, what if they don't put the VOR? Can we submit elsewhere? Let's just be clear about this whole area now. So we are happy. You do not need to retract your paper from eLife in order to submit it elsewhere. We're happy for you at any stage to take your, because for us it's a reviewed preprint. We claim no ownership of the paper. We've just reviewed your preprint as a service. You can then do anything you like with it. You can choose to submit it as a version of record under the eLife name, and it will go to PubMed then. Once it's in PubMed, it's very unlikely that other journals will publish it, although we don't mind if they want to, but I suspect you won't be able to. But we'll put the reviews on it and put it on our website before it's indexed in PubMed, etc. At that point, it's no different to a bioarchive preprint for them. I mean, they might have a knee-jerk reaction against it, but practically speaking, it's no different to a bioarchive preprint for them. And we'd be delighted for you to take our reviews and give them to Nature and say, look, it's a landmark paper, publish it, please. That would be great.
Yeah, just add, I think the important thing there is to notice that it's a reviewed preprint. It's not a journal article at that stage. It's only when the authors declare that it's a version of record, and then we typeset it, and at that point we send it to the indexers. Does it become what's equivalent of as a journal article? So it's two different stages of an article. So when it's still a reviewed preprint, it can be sent to another journal.
Thanks for that clarification as well, Fiona. So we had a couple of questions around sort of why about the fees that we're charging for the new review process. Where those numbers sort of come from, why we're sort of charging for peer review at the point the manuscript is sent for peer review. Fiona?
Yeah, so the fee, which is being reduced from $3,000 to $2,000, is charged at the point that we send an article out for peer review. Now, it's important to notice that this cost includes the initial evaluation, the staff checks, the peer review, the publication of the reviewed preprint online, re-review of that, publication of subsequent versions of the reviewed preprint, and then the publication of the version of record. So it's not just a review process. There's a whole publication process that it costs. But because, as Mike said earlier, because we're sending or we're publishing everything that has a review on it, that whereas before we were rejecting a number of articles, that enables us to reduce our costs.
I think we don't make a profit, so everything that so we just can't charge you our costs. We can't break down those costs for annoying legal reasons, but to do with US law. But you have to believe us that we're not making a profit out of this.
It's European law. Don't blame us all on the Americans.
I thought it was.
No, it's European law. And I also right. You can imagine a world where it's all broken down in some kind of a la carte menu, but it gets too complicated to do. So we tried to sort of fold it all together and average across all papers to come up with something that's fair, while also recognizing that $2,000 is a lot for a lot of people, and if it's too much, we will absorb those costs. It's sort of built into our model to assume that some fraction of our authors can't pay, and our funders are happy to continue to subsidize that as they do the rest of the organization.
Yeah, authors who can't afford the fee can request a full waiver as they could before.
I don't mind taking this question, saying that it's quite interesting. Like, will you publish a paper even if all reviewers find it to be fundamentally flawed? And the answer to that question is it's already published. It's on bioRxiv and it's fundamentally flawed. We will comment on it and say it's fundamentally flawed. Yes, and I think that's a good thing, because if there's a fundamentally flawed paper on bioRxiv, then we will say this paper is fundamentally flawed on bioRxiv. That's
And note, very often there are fundamentally flawed papers that get published in journals without any, despite the comments from the reviewers that they're fundamentally flawed. So I think, we do, the one exception will make in terms of sending papers out to be VORs is if they are both fundamentally flawed and dangerous. So we don't want to be in the business of sanctioning, dangerous alternative, medic theories about that'll affect patient treatment or some other aspect of public health or safety and well-being. So where we have some guardrails in the process to make sure that we're not endorsing things that are going to prove to be dangerous. But I think that a work of science that is ambitious and it fails to achieve its goals and is I think best served by us saying this is ambitious and fails to achieve its goals rather than just by hiding our comments from the universe.
And I should add there that obviously, if anything is dangerous, we'll be asked, we'll ask bioarchive to withdraw it as any preprint is found to be.
That's great, thank you. So we'll go now to some of the attendees who've got their hands raised. And I believe John Hammer has been waiting quite a while, so I will now, or when Zoom works for me, allow you to talk. So if you would like to unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think I'm going to come back to the question again about the gatekeeper for publishing in eLife, which is essentially going to be the editorial, the initial decision of the editor. And so, for papers that are clearly really outstanding, that's fine. And for papers that are clearly the opposite, it's fine. And I think the decision of an editor would probably be what most people would decide. But the thing is, for those papers in the middle, I mean, the value of the traditional review process has been that, the people put in the effort, the reviewers, to go through the nitty gritty, the devil's in the details, to separate the spin from the reality, and to then help the editor make a decision whether this paper should be published in eLife or not. And so since that, important input has been removed from the equation in terms of gatekeeping for publication, my gut feeling is that the sort of overall, sort of score you would give to a paper, significance, quality, impact, is going to float up. It's going to float. I mean, each journal has its position in the world. Is it better or higher impact or lower impact? My gut feeling is eLife will float up because the natural tendency would be for the gatekeeper to really push towards papers that are, I think, in the outstanding category. It could be, and it also depends on your throughput. I mean, if you're going to triple the amount of papers you publish.
Well, we will strongly be advocating for that not to happen. Obviously, we do not have individual editorial control, but we will, as a leadership, be strongly advocating people to be more broad-minded in what they review under the new model, because they now have the opportunity to have a richer take on the paper and say what the strengths and weaknesses are. I mean, we've discussed this with our editors many times. And
sure, I know you thought about it much more than me, but do you understand my question?
And absolutely, yeah,
absolutely. And we have also, some of our editors interpreted it the same way to begin with as well. So
yes. Not
only do I understand it, but there's a danger of it becoming reality, of people being more selective, because they also think that the thing that they're trying to do is protect the eLife name and the literature.
Yes,
we've having discussed it with them now as much as we can. We hope that won't happen. Our aim is not to protect the eLife name. Our aim is for the eLife name to now have less value than before, if any.
To associate it with high quality peer reviews rather than with high quality papers per se. Exactly. So right. So I agree with Tim. We know this is a concern that's been addressed internally, and we were been always aware of. Obviously, as Tim says, we don't tell our editors, handle this paper, don't handle that paper. That's not the way it works and can't work that way. But we are going to. It's one of the main things we're going to be watching as the system gets off the ground. And, as in the past, we'll just, we'll work with our editors to try to come up with a policy that works consistently across the journal so that we're all at least operating on with the same concept. We do not want that to happen. The system is we will not consider it to be a success if we just if this is a backdoor way to becoming nature. It's not our goal. Our goal is to is to review a wide range of papers, filling the full dynamic range of the types of assessments that we would like to make.
Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. Sorry, I didn't click the unmute button. Yeah, we've got quite a few more people as well. So I will hand now over to Konstantin, who's had their hand up a while. Hi, Konstantin. You should be able to unmute now.
Yeah, good evening. I have a question regarding the accept reject rate. Will it change with the implementation of the new review system? Will you be more strict? Because now with the new system, reviewers can't reject the papers anymore. So you should be more stricter, right?
Yeah, it's another view on what John was just asking with a slightly different. Yeah, I mean, it's a slightly different take, right? Like, I think John was thinking of it as a way to emphasize, like it'll sort of rise in quality, and because the authors have the editors have the opportunity to do it. I think I don't think that we don't want there to become a system where people are more selective at the triage stage than they would be. We will be carefully monitoring it and doing everything we can to make sure that is not what happens.
Okay, thank you. May I as a follow-up, what are the credentials of those who are making this decision? Like, are these professionals in their given scientific specialty?
Yeah.
All of our editors are active scientists and experienced.
And there's a whole behind the scenes system by which we make sure that papers end up in the hands of the appropriate reviewing editors who have expertise in the field. And we pay attention to how selective our reviewing editors are, and we try. We're looking for editors who are broad-minded and are trying to use recognize the opportunities here, and are not really looking to use this as a way to just reject more papers. And I don't think they will. By and large, our editors have broad views of their field, and I think will embrace the opportunity rather than kind of go in this retrograde direction.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. I hope that helped. So
I'm just going to take a question on blind review, which is from Andreas at the bottom, because it's a fun one. We understand all of the benefits of blind review, and we are very interested to hear any ideas about how that can be achieved in the world of preprinting. We are likely, I think, to do some trials to see if it's possible to do internal triage where we just ask our editors not to look for the preprint. But we are aware that in the modern world, it's just really, really hard to do blind review with archive and bioarchive around, and particularly so in a journal that only publishes papers that are already preprinted, like us. And so it's I mean, I'm a big fan of the idea of trying, but I don't know how to try right now.
Thanks. Thank you for that, pointing out that sort of question there. There was a question in the chat a little while ago, and then I'll try and get to the last few people who've had their hands raised. For more junior PIs, there are sort of decisions around tenure and promotion that may be affected by the new eLife model. Is there any sort of advice you might be able to give to junior PIs who would like to engage with the new model but might be risking potentially professional repercussions in doing so? I don't know if anyone would like to sort of take.
I mean, I don't think it's a risk. I mean, I don't know. I don't. I think that hiring panels and funding agencies that are not paying attention to what we do will look at eLife and just associate it with the old-fashioned eLife, and ones that are paying attention to what we do will go and look at the little summary we wrote and see if the paper's any good. And so that's my take on it. And so I think that it isn't going to significantly devalue the journal in the name of funding agencies and hiring panels. in my field, it's increasingly possible to get a job with a hiring panel without publishing a paper in a journal at all, just with bioarchive papers. And it's certainly possible to get funding from HHMI and Wellcome with bioarchive papers. It's not so easy with NIH yet, but and maybe Mike, you can say, or I don't know, Fiona, maybe you can say something about the public support we've got from those funding agencies already.
It's changing rapidly, and I think that it didn't take very long before preprints became, something that people were, if not highlighting as the exclusive part of their publishing output, certainly a core part of it. Every tenure case I've reviewed at Berkeley in the last 5 years has had a significant fraction of the work in preprints. So I think junior PIs who are trying to get themselves established, their biggest challenge is getting known and getting visibility in the field. And I think that I understand why people are nervous about this, but I think that, experience suggests that the system adapts to the way that people present themselves. And I think that, since you have control over how you present yourself in both the promotion part and also funding, we expect that the system will absorb this reasonably quickly and reasonably well once it's off the ground.
Yeah, those little assessments that we're going to write about you are designed to be small enough that you can put them in your CV under the paper. So if we say your paper is a landmark discovery, you can write it directly under the paper in your CV.
And it's a big difference for you to say your paper is a landmark discovery and for us to say your paper is a landmark discovery. And I think that our hope is that will very quickly become something people use as a key feature in their job promotion funding applications.
Yep. And we have had a lot of support for the reviewed preprint in that sense. We released a press release a couple of months ago with support from a number of funders. But I should mention that we're still going along the process where we're producing an article that's a version of record that is seen as the same as equivalent to any normal journal article. So fundamentally, no author should be worried that the process is going to exclude them in any way, shape, or form. As we're still producing something that at the end of the process that is equivalent of any journal article.
That's great, thank you. So now we'll head back to, we've only got another few minutes, so we'll try and do a lightning round of these. So we'll head to Marufu first. So you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I'm Dr. Maruf Raimi Olalikon from Niger Delta University in Nigeria, per se. Be that as it may, I want to say that this initiative is such a landmark initiative, and is an evidence that we have people thinking out of the box. Be that as it may, I'm a little bit concerned. My concern is for researchers in Africa, in less developed country who can as well tap into this initiative of yours. For me, for some time now, I've been trying to get my work published with eLife, but the publication fee is something that put me off because there is no way I can actually afford it. I don't know. Is there any waiver or consideration that to that?
Absolutely. Yeah.
I overheard you when you talk about waiver, but I didn't actually get it clearer if those from developing countries, to what extent would they be considered in that regard? That is my number one question. The second one of my students actually submitted this work in a preprint journal which was put out there. But when the work was submitted to a journal, we now noticed that the methodology was actually wrong. And the editor get in touch with me and said, this paper please recheck the methodology. Now, for the eLife new model that is being reviewed and is being, you avoid rejection or acceptance. In that line of thought, that the entire methodology needs to be changed to enable the work come out in its best form. What advice with eLife, or how do eLife intend to handle such a scenario going forward under this new? Thank you, and over.
Thanks. Just to first clarify, we have a blanket waiver policy. If authors who can't afford to pay don't have to pay. They ask us for a waiver and we will grant it. So it's anybody who's concerned that they don't have the ability to pay, for whatever reason, if you come from a country with poor science funding or from a place in a big country with poor science, you're poorly funded. It's anybody who can't pay, we don't ask you to pay. So that's the easy answer. The question of a paper where the review determines that kind of the work needs to be done in a fundamentally different way, as I think what you're asking. In some sense, I think that in some cases that would result in sort of a completely different paper, right? That's done in a completely different way. It's an interesting challenge because it's unclear whether the world should view that as an updated version of the same manuscript, which our system can easily handle, right? You send us a new version with different methodology and we address it. I think the case where the reviews point out something that, is sort of it needs to be done in a different way, I think probably that will just stand as a statement about that particular version of the paper, and then a new version would exist as a separate publication. I should emphasize, when our reviewers come to that conclusion, we're not going to say this paper, we're not going to trash the paper. We're going to point out just clearly where we think, what we think the limitations of the existing methods are. That will be a valuable thing to have out there in the world, and it will be articulated in a way that is not designed to, and I don't think will be received as criticism of the science and scientists, but rather just as a judgment about that particular approach to the work. So I think the system can accommodate that, although it is an interesting question of, so what's the limit of, at what point does something constitute a completely different work, and when are we updating it? And honestly, we haven't fully grappled with that question, but it's something that I think we do need to think about a little bit more than we have. So,
that's great, thank you. And I hope that sort of answers your question.
Yeah, I can stay, by the way, if people want to continue to ask questions as long as they need to.
Yes. Quite a few of our staff members are based in Europe, though, so I think it will just be.
Yeah, if people leave. It's the beginning of my day, so I'm happy to keep talking.
So we'll just take just a last sort of question from Wendy, who's been sort of waiting for a while. So Wendy, you should be able to speak now.
Hi there. Thank you. Wendy Glauser from Medscape. I'm writing about preprints and this kind of living review process. You mentioned that the peer review will be faster than with the conventional journal model, but I didn't quite get how, or what the efficiencies are, since you're still soliciting the reviews and the reviewers are still taking the time to review the manuscript in detail. So where are the efficiencies? How will it be faster?
Sorry, the point there is that we will review the paper. I don't expect the actual initial review process to be necessarily any faster, but because because we will then be posting the paper and the peer reviews at that point, the period of time it takes to go from a preprint to a reviewed preprint will be much faster than the period it takes currently to go from a preprint to a published paper, because there's not that second stage where the authors go back, respond to that is, because we're making an intermediate, in some sense, an intermediate. In the current world, you would think of that as an intermediate product, that you will see a visible output of peer review much more quickly. in this process than in the previous one. I wasn't trying to say we were going to accelerate the initial peer review process, although obviously we are constantly trying to do that. That was not the point I was trying to make.
Okay, and will you be posting the peer reviews as they come in one by one?
No, we because for exactly the reason that we want the reviewers to have a chance to discuss things with each other. It's one of the ways in which sort of errors in judgment, mistakes, things that they missed are best caught is in that eLife consultation process. It's by far my favorite thing about eLife, and I love many things about eLife, that peer review consultation is really, really valuable. So the peer reviewers and editor get a chance to discuss their reviews with each other. And then the way, I handle this as an editor is then we kind of draft a document review letter collectively, and we have a chance to point out, where you basically have many eyes and many ideas going to the. It's posting the individual peer reviews as they come out. It doesn't. Then we're just sort of a stenographer rather than adding kind of real editorial oversight to the process.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Wendy. So with that, I am afraid that we will sort of need to close things out. I'm really sorry for the people that we weren't able to get to your questions, but please do feel free.
I'm going to put my email address in here. People feel free to reach out to me by email. I'm happy to answer all as many questions. I've also saved the chat, and we'll try to if I can figure out people's email address, I'll try to get back to them individually, but also just please forward questions to me, and I will address them.
Yeah, you can also reach out to eLife staff journal.development@elifesciences.org, and as well we can sort of coordinate if you have any queries like that. So those are your sort of points of contact moving forward. Thanks again, everyone, for turning up for such great discussions and great questions. I hope we managed to sort of touch on the main topics that sort of everyone was interested in, and we hope to see some of your submissions soon in the new review process. Thanks very much, and have a wonderful morning, evening, nighttime, wherever you're based.
Bye, Britt. Thanks so much for coming.